Hey, you guys, welcome back to another video. I just recently took a 3-day vow of silence. So that spanned from Monday to Wednesday. I got the idea for it. I was inspired basically starting on Saturday, and I decided to turn it into an experiment. And so I kicked it off starting on Monday when I woke up, all the way to until I went to sleep on Wednesday. And in those 3 days, basically, I learned a lot about just a lot in general. And so I figured I'd share my findings with you guys in a live stream format instead of a video, because there's actually quite a lot to talk about. So let's dive into it. And here we go. So on day one, when I started this experiment, the first thing I noticed was that there was no expectations regarding a need to speak to people. I think I'm going to get some water. I'll be right back. Give me a minute. Okay, so day one, there was no expectations regarding this need to speak to people. So before I carried out this experiment, I always felt as though I had this need to respond whenever someone spoke to me. So for example, if someone entered the room, or if someone was saying something but they may not be directly addressing me, I felt as though I had to respond to them. I had to acknowledge their presence. I had to acknowledge their thoughts, their ideals, and their beliefs. But because I took this vow, all of a sudden that expectation disappeared. And I felt like I could be more of who I was just naturally. I didn't feel a need to have to put on a mask. This need to please others, right? People pleasing. So that's a big part of, I guess, this false identity that I've created for myself when it comes to hanging around, when it comes to being in the presence of other people. I have this false belief that I have to cater to other people and acknowledge their existence. What's funny was that, so I told my family this, right? I told my mom, my dad, my sister what I was doing. And what's funny was that I noticed, because the people in my life knew that I was carrying out this experiment, they resonated with that fact, right? They felt the same way. And so they didn't really feel the need to speak to me that much either. And this very highly deviates from how they would normally behave. So for example, my mom is someone that loves to talk, right? So whenever she enters a room, she will impulsively just start speaking to you every single time. almost without any doubt. She'll just say something. She'll either tell you about her day, she'll describe what she's doing, she'll bring up some topic to talk about, right? But in my presence that day, because they knew that I was carrying the experiment, they didn't feel the need to say anything, which was very interesting, right? There was a time where we were just sitting together at the dining table, and we were both eating our meal. And usually she would be talking the entire time, nonstop. But then on that day, she was actually surprisingly very silent, right? Because I guess she knew that I wasn't going to respond to her. And so her expectation of her false belief, this like false sense of identity of always having to speak, also disappeared, because she no longer felt as though she had to communicate with us. With me, anyway. So that was interesting for me to witness. So that's the very first thing that I noticed on day one, which is the expectations regarding the need to communicate. There's also another thing I noticed, was that things that you would normally blame yourself for no longer happen. So for example, let's say that you did X, right? You made a mistake. You, let's say, dropped something. Normally you would blame yourself for being, let's say, clumsy or not paying attention to what's going on. For me, even though I made a mistake, because of my lack of ability to communicate, that no longer happened. And I think this stems from like past childhood trauma, right? Where I got yelled at by my parents for dropping objects, even if it was just an innocent, like a innocent mistake, right? We all do that, right? Sometimes we like drop a spoon, or we drop a piece of paper, or like a chopstick, and it clatters on the floor and it makes a sound. The way I was raised, whenever that happened, basically one of our parents, I'm not going to say who, would go ballistic and just scream their heads off at us for dropping that item, which, as you may know now that I'm grown up, that's not normal behavior. So I always felt as though, I guess, I had to justify my own mistakes. I had to justify that I made a mistake and accept whatever punishment that was going to come from making that mistake. So there's a lot of blaming myself for things that happened. But because I took the vow of silence, right, and where I would normally blame myself, I never did that anymore. Because I realized that me blaming myself is, again, a form of people pleasing. Because I can't communicate with the people around me, I can't say, oh, I made a mistake, I'm sorry, right? So the truth is that I myself personally do not care. I don't see mistakes as a mistake from my own perspective. I don't see them as mistakes, right? I just see them as a part of everyday life. Being clumsy is not being clumsy. It's just a part of everyday life. And so because I no longer had the expectations to communicate my mistakes to others, I never blame myself anymore when things were out of my control or things just happened. So I was a lot more lenient on myself, and that was very eye-opening to me, to realize that I was doing all this for other people, which is not a very good way to live. Because then you're always basically looking around for approval or disapproval from the people around you. And so you never really discover who you are as a person, right? If you're always blaming yourself, and if you're always blaming yourself for things that are out of your control, then that's not a really healthy way to live, right? It's only going to lead to misery, which is a large part of my life up until I performed this experiment and I realized this for myself. Okay, and the third thing that I learned, and this is just from day one, okay? So this is only from day one. I'll go through day 2 and 3 later. But the third thing that I learned was that a lot of people cover up nervousness through speaking. So when you're nervous or you're in the presence of someone and either the person makes you nervous or you're in a nervous state, people will typically talk to alleviate whatever emotions they are feeling in that moment. Psychologically, this makes sense, right? You want to share basically your state of being with someone. So if let's say you're feeling unease or you're feeling worried, right? You're worried about what's going to happen because you heard on the news that, XYZ is coming. And so you feel worried, right? So what we typically do as humans is we will talk to someone about these worries to try and alleviate it by sharing our worries. We are able to basically, we feel better by voicing our worries, right? It helps us to alleviate the nervousness that we are experiencing, helps us to feel as though we're not alone in our beliefs, in our worries, in our emotions. Because if you're the only one that feels that way, right? We want to feel like we belong, basically. That gives us a sense of comfort. So if you're saying like, oh, did you hear about what XYZ said on the news? I'm worried about what's going to happen. And then everyone else around you is just like, there's nothing to worry about. You're crazy, right? And imagine every single person you spoke to said that. You would start to believe that, oh, well, maybe there is nothing to worry about, right? Maybe it's just all in my head. But if people start validating your worries, then those worries start to become a reality, right? Then you'll be like, oh, now I have a reason to worry. So therefore, I'm going to continue to put myself in this emotional state. And so speaking is almost, in some cases, it is almost a detriment if you're someone who tends to worry. Because by speaking to someone, you are only reinforcing your own negative emotional state. You are only reinforcing those false beliefs that you have, which don't really exist. So a lot of people, when they're in a kind of nervous or negative state, where they're kind of, antsy about what's going to happen, you'll notice they'll start speaking. Like a self-soothe. It's a soothing mechanism for them, right? To help them become more comfortable. So that's something for you to look out for in your daily life. And the last part, point number 4 for day 1 is that even though I didn't speak verbally to people, I noticed I had a lot more internal dialogue with my own thoughts. So I spoke to myself in my head a lot, even though I didn't speak to anyone else, because that was allowed, right? I'm allowed to speak to myself in my mind. And I realized, wow, I talk a lot in my head to myself, to the point that I would be unconscious while I'm doing it, because I'm so like caught in my own head, that when I brought my awareness back to the present moment, I would panic, because I would lose track of whether or not I was actually speaking out loud to someone or to myself. So like, for example, I would imagine myself having a conversation with, let's say, a friend of mine. And then when I stopped having that conversation, I would panic because I'd be like, wait, did I just speak to someone? Because that would break my valve silence, right? But then I was like, oh, wait, no, that was just in my head. So I actually started panicking a lot. Well, not panic, right? But kind of like, oh no, did I break my valve silence? So that happened like 3 or 4 times, simply just from day one, because of the internal dialogue ahead of myself. So that's a good way to kind of gauge, I guess, how much you actually speak to yourself, how much noise is in there, which kind of explains why if you feel a lot of anxiety, it might be because of all the conversations you're having with yourself in your own head that don't really exist, if you learn how to quiet your mind. So yeah, those are the things I learned simply from day one, just going over them all again, which is no expectations regarding I need to speak to people. Things you would normally blame yourself for, that no longer happens. You notice that people tend to speak to cover up the fact that they're nervous. And you tend to have a lot more internal dialogue with yourself, because you're no longer having a dialogue with other people. So those are the 4 big points that I noticed. And then on day two, the first thing I noticed was that it became a lot more natural, right? Oh, and before I go further, I should mention that I also did technically break my valve silence on each day once. So on day 1, I broke it by speaking out loud to someone, by asking them a question. And basically the question was, I was asking them where a certain object was, right? I was asking them like, where is the Febreze, because I wanted to spray my room because there was some weird odors in there. So I said that out loud. And it wasn't until afterward that I realized that I spoke out loud, and I'm like, oh crap, I broke my valve silence. But again, because of the earlier point that I learned, things you normally blame yourself for, you don't do anymore, right? So even though I broke my valve silence, I was just like, okay, that's fine, right? It's just a slip up. I'll just let it happen. It's also a learning experience. So I wasn't like super adamant and hard on myself, just because I broke that valve silence. So I guess you could say it taught me to take myself more easier, right? To be more lenient towards myself, to be more kind and loving towards myself when I slip up. So yeah, that was day 1. I broke my valve silence by asking a question. And I'll go into this more when I finished all the days, but there's also something I learned about what would cause someone to break their valve silence. So day 2, I realized excessive speaking correlates to feelings of unworthiness. The ability to just exist is not present in society. I basically came to this realization by taking a walk outside when it was raining, and it was completely quiet around me. No people, no expectations of talking, and I was just doing a lot of deep inner reflecting, right? Based on the results I got from day 1. During this time, I began to examine more of my inner beliefs compared to how reality actually is. So, for example, I realized the belief where you think you are a burden to others is actually not true. It's all in your head. So, for example, I've always had this like stigma, right? Of when I'm crossing the road, I feel like I am a burden to the cars that are trying to turn because I'm in their way. And again, this is probably due to trauma because of cars in the past. The drivers were like idiots and rushing, and so they like honked me, basically projecting their own feelings of unworthiness, feelings of like they're a burden onto me. So I kind of absorbed those and took them on as for myself, thinking that it was the truth, but it wasn't. So on that day, even though I was crossing the road many times, right, because I had silenced my outer voice, it was also easier to silence my inner voice, which are the false beliefs and the thinking that one is a burden. So it's a lot easier to silence those thoughts and not judge a situation before it's happened. So what I learned basically was, in reality, no one has those thoughts about you except you. You are the one that creates your own suffering. So like, if you're walking on a narrow path, right, and there's a person in front of you, what really happens? So in your mind, you might be like, oh no. In your mind, you might be like, I'm in this person's way, or you might be aggressive and you'd be like, this person is in my way, right? So it goes two ways. So that's the situation that you play out in your head, where you're just like, one of us has to move, otherwise we're going to get into each other's way, and then we're like going to start an argument and start fighting with one another. In reality, what actually happens if you encounter this, and this actually happened to me on day 2, is if you're walking on a narrow path and there's a person in front of you, what will happen is you will both just stop in front of each other when you come face to face and meet one another. And eventually, through nonverbal communication, one of you will find a way to walk around the other person. There's no words exchanged, and there's no judgment either. So they don't view you as someone that is like in their way, and you don't view the other person as someone that's in your way, right? It just happens where it's natural, right? It's like, oh, there's something in front of me. We'll find a way to move around each other, go on about our day. Whereas before, the thoughts I had were like, either I'm in his way or this person is in my way. And then I would create this like struggle and conflict in my mind about how we were going to get around one another. So I guess being more present in the present moment was something I noticed on day 2 of my valve silence. And the third point, I guess, that I discovered was that the inclination to respond. So you're more likely to speak or respond to something that happens outside of you if it is negative compared to if it's positive. So there are many times I had to actually catch myself and not speak because something in my external reality was negative. So for example, if someone insults you, right, that is considered negative, you are impulsively going to have this like urge to say something. And I caught myself about to do that many times on day 1 and 2. So it was only if I wasn't conscious in those moments and realized that I was about to speak, I would have spoke. But because I caught myself and I was like, so what happens is basically your mind and your body kind of work on autopilot without you realizing it. So if something negative happens, you will respond. That is the autopilot at work. But because I was in a vow of silence, right, all of a sudden I could consciously stop that autopilot before it happens. So something negative happens, I'm about to say something, but then I catch myself and I stop. So that is an example of being more present in the moment, because now you don't have to respond to things unless you want to, right? So it just goes to prove that if something negative happens to you, you don't necessarily have to view it as a negative event. You don't have to allow yourself to get into a negative emotional state. You can actually control it, right? And you want to take things further so you can maintain your sense of peace. Take things further, you could even constantly maintain a sense of happiness and joy no matter what happens to you. So for example, something negative happens to you, you're in a state of joy. Something positive happens to you, you're in a state of joy. Nothing happens to you, you're in a state of joy. I think those that are like truly enlightened masters are the ones that are able to do this. So it's a very neat trick to have. If you're able to catch yourself before you respond to something, whether it's negative or positive. Yeah. And that is it for day 2. And on day 2, I also broke my vow of silence. It was more of a statement. I don't know if I would necessarily. Oh, yeah, I did. So I broke my vow of silence on day 2 in response to someone else. So again, people pleasing. Basically, what I said was, you can close the light if you want, because I was sleeping in a room. Oh, sorry. I said you can turn the light on if you want, because I was sleeping in a room. It was dark, right? And then someone came in, but basically I didn't sleep yet, right? I was just saying like, so I was telling them that it was okay to like turn the light on if they need it for like a short while, because they're coming in and out. So I kind of guessed that if they did come in, they're probably going to come in for like a short while, do whatever it is they're going to do, then they're going to get out. So I said, you can turn the light on if you want. And I was going to take a nap. So in that moment, I was not that conscious, probably because I let my guard down, right? Because I'm just about to go to sleep. Like, so I'm resting and I'm like about to go to sleep. So I probably let my guard down in that moment. And it helped me to realize that I have a tendency to respond and people please. Again, I don't want to say it's good or bad, but this tendency, this trait tends to come when my guard is down. So in order for me to be more conscious about my tendency to be a people pleaser, I need to be more present in the moment and realize that that is a pattern that my body and mind have been conditioned to carry out on autopilot. This can be applied to your life too, right? Let's say, for example, their body and mind is wired towards autopilot on towards anger, right? So they're very prone to getting angry when things go wrong. That is their autopilot. Or someone is very prone to being sad or depressed on autopilot. So you can stop yourself from getting into these emotional states by being conscious that that is your autopilot, and then making the conscious effort and decision to stop that process before it happens. So using myself as an example, I have a tendency to people please. If I'm conscious, then I realize, okay, this happens. I'm very tempted to people please because that is my autopilot. So before I head to the outcome in which I do people please, which may be at my own expense, I can stop it and say, no, I'm going to be selfish. I'm going to love myself, even if I know it's hard, because I need to learn this, right? Being too much of a people pleaser is bad, and being too selfish is also bad. So it's good to be in the middle. It's good to be balanced. So that is one way you can, I guess, examine your own autopilot and how you to react to situations when they happen. And that is it for day 2. There was also a moment where I broke my vow of silence, but I don't really count it as such. Basically, I walked in the kitchen after my nap, and I was like, ooh, food, because I smelled food cooking. But I wasn't speaking to anyone. It just so happened that my sister was in the kitchen, and so I was just saying it. But I don't really count it as myself breaking that vow of silence, because I was kind of just speaking to myself. I wasn't really speaking to someone. So that might be another kind of thing to notice, which is when something, I guess, catches your attention. When something catches your attention, you tend to point it out. Kind of like if you're on a road trip and the person beside you just keeps reading out every single sign that like catches their eye, right? That can become annoying over time. Yeah, and that's it for day 2. So we're going to move on into day 3 now so the last day of my vow of silence, which just was yesterday. It feels good now that it's actually over, because I can finally share everything that I've like learned. It was a profound learning experience. So and I was actually debating on extending it, but I decided 3 days was enough. I'd already gathered more than enough information for this experiment, so we put a stop to it. Okay, so day 3. Day 3, we got a lot more spiritual and esoteric and philosophical. So basically, I'm going to read my notes out to you. They may or may not be true, but just listen. So, everything in this world is a physical representation of energy. We are all balls of energy manifested into physical form. All of us require energy in order to survive. Or at least these balls of energy, which we can call entities, these entities require energy in order to survive. In order for these entities to continue to survive, they cling on to humans and influence them to perform certain tasks that expend energy, such as exercising, being in a rush, doing drugs, smoking, etc. Doing these tasks inherently feeds the entity and allows it to continue living. And by reacting to people performing these tasks, that expends energy, which is why it's important to focus only on the things that you want in your life. So for example, let's say entity attaches itself onto person A. Person A influences person A to insult person B with anger. Person B then responds with anger. Thus, it gives out energy, right? So he responds with anger, he expends energy. This then feeds the entity that is attached to person A. And remember that the entity that latched itself onto person A is the one that influenced person A to insult person B. So now the entity can extract energy from 2 life forms instead of just one. So when the entity needs energy and wants to feed, it will then kind of take over the person's mind and influence them to act in the way that they want them to act. So for example, let's say that there's an entity that requires the energy of anger in order to survive. This entity will latch itself onto someone, make them angry, or influence them to act in anger so that the person then becomes angry and gives off that energy, the energy of anger. And then this energy then is used to feed the entity. There are probably also other entities or energetic life forms, like maybe there's an entity that requires love in order to continue living. So it latches onto someone, influences them to act in a more loving manner. Don't think of the entities as good or bad. Just think of it as, if I have this impulsive urge to act a certain way, it's probably because the entity is influencing me to act in this way. And then knowing this, do I enjoy acting in this manner? And if I don't, then I just need to not do that action. I just need to not act impulsively. I just need to stop and take a breath, take a step back, and realize that it is not me that wants to hurt this person. It is the entity that is attached to me that wants me to hurt this person so that it can feed. The Irish, I believe, have a saying, right? They don't say, so in the West, it's common for us to say something like, I am sad. This implies that you as a person are sad, right? You are the emotion of sadness. Whereas I believe I can't remember. I think it's like, yeah, the Irish. They have a saying which is, instead of saying I am sad, they will say, sadness is descended upon me. So they think of the emotion of sadness as an actual third-party entity that in the moment is temporarily attached to you, which is making you sad. Again, this is the mindset of not blaming yourself. When you're feeling certain things. So by saying sadness is descended upon me, or sadness is currently attached on me, we are saying, I am not sadness. It's just that this entity has latched itself onto me and is not letting go. Eventually, it will let go, and then I will no longer be sad. But you don't attribute the emotion of sadness, or you don't blame yourself for it. You basically redirect responsibility towards an external third party, which in a way is a more positive way to live, right? So one way of thinking about it is, you could say, it is my fault because I can't control my emotions. Or you can say, this is something that is out of my control because the emotion of sadness is attached onto me. So it's not me that's sad, it is the entity. And so you kind of shift the blame towards somewhere else, instead of always looking at yourself and blaming yourself for things that happen. And that way you have more peace of mind, instead of always kind of putting yourself down. You can kind of give yourself more leniency and love. And the second I'll just read you the notes anyway. But the second point that I learned is from day 3 is not talking results in many of your impulsive behaviors being brought to the light. You become more aware of these behaviors. Many times we act impulsive without realizing it. So again, acting on autopilot all the time. We must act consciously, not impulsively. Impulsive living is living unconsciously, and awareness living is living consciously and fully in the present. You will also notice how other people act impulsively, such as talking impulsively just to fill the silence, or a strong desire to share and bond with others through communication. And and I already mentioned this, but your vow of silence is broken due to impulsive behaviors. However, if you can maintain consistent conscious living, then you can control it. So what I learned basically is that if you want to realize what are all the areas in my life where I act unconsciously or on autopilot, you could try this experiment for yourself and look at and take note of all the situations in which you break your vow of silence. That shows you what your impulsive behaviors are and how you can fix them to live more consciously in the present moment. So for example, right, here's a perfect example that I just caught myself doing, which is if you notice in my videos, I tend to like do this with my chair, where I will shift it from side to side. But the minute I become aware of it, the minute I become aware of myself doing it, then I can stop myself from always shifting. It's not a good or bad thing. It's just a way to make it easier for myself to kind of think about what I want to say, right? It's kind of like a self-soothing mechanism. Same with my desire to move my hands around when I'm talking, because it helps me to talk. Again, if you're doing this experiment, don't label things as good or bad, right? Because if you're labeling things as bad, then you are getting into the mindset of blaming yourself, which is not healthy if you're trying to create a positive mindset. So typically I noticed this with like the younger generation, right? They have this tendency to blame themselves and put themselves down and disempower themselves. So what I mean by this is they will say something like, they will compare themselves to other people and then be like, that person can do that task better than me, so therefore it must mean that I'm not good. Instead of saying, that person can do that task better than me, they are really good at what they do. They must have spent a lot of time practicing. So that's two very different mindsets, right? One is appreciating someone for the work that they have put in. The other is putting yourself down because you're comparing yourself to someone that has spent more time than you at a certain craft. So naturally, they're going to be better. So you could say that the younger generation is wired towards negativity rather than positivity. It might be because no one taught them how to cultivate a positive mindset, right? I know that took me a long time to learn. It's only recently now that I'm a young adult that I basically learned that cultivating a negative mindset does not help me in my life. And the end result of that, of cultivating a negative mindset, is actually living in suffering. So at the beginning of my journey into, I guess, YouTube, right? So you can take this as a metaphorical example. But let's say someone is starting out making YouTube videos and they're putting in the work, right? They're putting in, let's say they're making YouTube videos every single day, right? They're pushing themselves to take action and do that. So they're staying consistent. And so let's say this person has uploaded 30 videos in 30 days. So they've been doing it every single day for a month. And let's say their goal was to hit 100 subscribers and 1,000 views in a month. And let's say they don't get those results. This person might be very tempted to cultivate a negative mindset and say that maybe YouTube isn't for them. Or maybe they're a terrible speaker. Or maybe that they have nothing to offer the world. Because they've fallen into the trap of comparison. Their expectation of 100 subscribers and 1,000 views is what's responsible for their negative mindset. And the reason they even have these expectations in the first place is because they are comparing themselves to other YouTubers who have a larger fan base. This mindset would not exist in the first place if the person was completely unaware of their competition. This is why people are happier. This is why our, what do you call them? Our grandparents, our older generation, our ancestors, why they were happier compared to us kids, young adults in the current generation that we are now, is because it was more difficult for them, our ancestors, to compare themselves to others because they didn't have the internet. So with the internet that we have now, we are able to compare ourselves. Well, we're able to communicate with basically anyone in the world. That also allows us to compare ourselves to anyone in the world. Whereas our ancestors were limited to comparing themselves to whoever was in their immediate surroundings. That means that they had a lot less competition, right? They might only be able to compare themselves to the neighborhood kids on the block, which is like maybe 5 or 10 people at most. Whereas today in our digital world, we don't compare ourselves to our neighborhood kids anymore, right? We're comparing ourselves to that pro YouTube celebrity star that's halfway across the world, and he's a sensational overnight success, right? His channel blew up in what, a month, whereas you've been working for a month and your channel's not going anywhere. So it's this comparison trap. When you fall into the comparison trap, you begin to cultivate a negative mindset. And when you cultivate a negative mindset, that leads to suffering, that leads to negative emotions, that leads to all these false beliefs about who you are that aren't true. So to break out of that habit, you need to be able to, I've heard this term before, right? But basically the term is, you need to cultivate a positive mindset in a very aggressive manner, which means in almost any situation that happens to you, you need to find a way to turn it into a positive one without any room for negativity. So you force yourself to see things through a positive lens. You force yourself to see everything and anything that happens to you in a positive manner, bordering on insanity. So let's say, for example, you are going to the store, right? And there's no parking spaces. And let's say you really need to get groceries that day because you really need to make dinner and you got no food at home. Let's say you can't find a single parking space And so you're now forced to, you have a choice in that moment, right? You can cultivate a positive, you can view the situation as positive or negative. So cultivating a positive mindset aggressively is forcing yourself to say, this is a positive outcome for me, because just because, right? There might be, let's say, an accident that happened in the store. And so because you're not able to park, then you're not caught in the accident. You basically just have unshakable faith that every single situation that you come across is positive. And according to the law of spirituality, that is actually what will happen in your life. When you view everything as positive, then that will actually happen in your life, where every single moment of your life is blessed, because you're aggressively cultivating that positive mindset and you're not allowing a shred of negativity to enter your life. Then what happens is your life is only filled with positive things. That's why they compare it to a garden, where it's like if you're planting seeds of positivity, then the seeds are going to grow up to be positive plants. And if you only allow yourself to grow positive thoughts, positive plants, positive mindset, then your garden is only going to be positive. But if you start introducing the concept of negativity, the concept of things not turning out in your highest good, then you start to introduce negative seeds into your garden. And then eventually what happens is that you'll get negative plants. And so for most people, their garden consists of negative plants and positive plants. The people that are more enjoyable to be around have a higher ratio of positive plants compared to negative ones. And the people that are not that enjoyable to be around have a higher ratio of negative plants compared to positive ones. It's basically that simple. And the way these plants or thoughts, mindset manifests itself into physical reality, you can see it basically on their face, right? You can see it in their physical body, in the energy they give off. Some people look really old for their age, right? They look weathered. They look like they're 70 when they're like 30 because they're overstressed, they're overworked. And this is because that stress and stuff takes a toll on them. And because they focus on that stress, they grow negative plants in their garden, in their mind garden. And then you have some people that are maybe 90 years old, but they look like they're 50, right? They're younger than most of the young adults their age, because their garden is full of positive plants. So there's no such thing to them as aging or negativity. That's why they are radiant and they're shining with youth. Their skin is like, firm and supple compared to that negative guy who's got wrinkles and like looks like he's about to fall over at any moment. That is basically the difference between negative plants and positive plants. It all comes down to every single moment of your life when you have a choice to make. Choose the positive mindset, even if it's difficult to do, because it's very difficult, right? You see an event, right? Let's say it's raining and you're just about to go out. You may be tempted to lean towards the negative. Or maybe there's an accident on the road. You maybe tend to lean to the negative. Or maybe someone steals something from you or something like that, right? You see it as negative. Be aggressively positive and say that it is good And while you may not know the reason for it in the moment, as long as you believe that it is in your highest good, eventually that will happen. There's a good quote that I've heard about this, which is, so an example is, let's say someone, a dear friend of yours, moves away or something like that. And so you can no longer interact with them. Instead of saying that it's a negative thing, one way is to see it as positive by saying that this person did not leave your life. The universe moved them out of your way because this person was preventing you from achieving your highest good. The universe knows more than we do. So even if we see a friend as a positive influence, the plan in which the universe or God has for us disagrees and is like, nope, I don't want this person obscuring you from where I want to take you. And where I want to take you is somewhere where you will agree with me that it is your highest good, that it is the best life that you could possibly live. And so because of that, you will agree with me if I move this person out of my way. The only way we could fight against that is if we don't want the highest good for ourselves. We want to stay in a reality of negativity and suffering. Then we would cling on to the things that we have lost. Otherwise, if we do want to live the best life that we possibly can, then we lean towards the positive mindset and just trust that the universe has the best things in store for us. So yeah, that is it for this live stream. So all of you that tuned in, I hope you got a lot of value out of this. I hope you learned a lot of information that you can apply to your own life. Merry Christmas to all of you. And with the new year coming around, just 2023, just around the corner, I'm very excited. And I hope that abundance and blessings come to you as well in your life. There's been a number of things that have happened that could be seen as negative. But basically, the universe has been moving a lot of things out of my way to make room for what's about to come in 2023. And I know this because it's a pattern that I've seen before in the past, where the universe will move what I deem as positive things. They'll move them out of the way. It's almost like loss. But then to me, I don't view it as loss because I know what the universe is trying to do. And so I'm okay with it. I have complete faith. I have complete trust in the universe. So I'll check in with you guys in a few months. And I'll let you know what the universe had in store for me when I look back on this video. So yeah, that is it for me. Have a wonderful evening to all of you. Peace and love, joy, wonderful blessings again. Have a wonderful day. And I'll see you sometime very soon in the future. Namaste.